Welcome back to the discussion, Protecting Data in a Connected World, sponsored by Recorded Future on Federal News Radio, part of the Federal News Network. My guest today is Levi Gundert, Vice President of Intelligence and Risk at Recorded Future. I'm your moderator, Scott Maucione. So, Levi, we were talking about, what disinformation is. What kind of trends are you seeing at Recorded Future within disinformation on things like Facebook or just throughout the internet as a whole?
So we see multiple countries that are actively launching and maintaining influence operations, and we actually put out a blog a couple months ago talking about some of the differences between tactics and what China's doing, what Russia's doing, what Iran is doing, and they all have different purposes. They all are attempting to achieve different outcomes with their disinformation campaigns and the influence operations. So, if you look at what Russia's doing, again, they're really trying to sow some discord and sow seeds of doubt within how we sort of process information, how we trust information, what we do with that information, which is very different from China, which has very different objectives in terms of what they want to achieve, which are much more aligned with sort of economic outcomes, and especially now, obviously, given the trade disputes, they have a lot more incentive to use these types of informational tools to try and influence voters in certain directions, in certain ways that are going to help them achieve their outcomes that are more tied to economics. And we also see Iran involved in this type of activity as well, and they've actually managed to fly somewhat under the radar, but there has been a lot of public reporting actually on some of their campaigns. So it is interesting to sort of watch these campaigns on an ongoing basis, and then of course, we expect the activity to ramp up going into an election year.
Sure.
in 2020.
So, you talked about voter influence. Is it only just voter influence, or are they trying to sort of change things in other ways too? One of the best examples I can think of is maybe in journalism. You kind of tear down an institution or something like the New York Times or the Washington Post, and then people say, well, they got this one thing wrong. How can we trust them in other ways, right? Are they trying to do that as well?
I think so. I think that's a great question. I think that's part of undermining our systems in the United States. It really, I think everything is fair game, and I think there's probably still some innovation to come in terms of how they think about the ways that they undermine our processes and our sources of information and our democratic process, unfortunately. And there's so many ways that they attack this. So we talked about obviously creating fake articles, but it's not just the written word. It's media, it's pictures, it's videos, it's doctoring, it's changing, deep fakes. It's not just constrained to the written word, and that's kind of the scariest part is. Now, as a consumer, when you're on social media or you're even on a mainstream news site, sometimes there's a question, am I listening or watching or reading something that is not true? Right. And I think that has really been the point and the goal of Russian information operations for a long time, and the digital age has sort of accelerated their ability to influence there. So it is actually very disconcerting because you're never going to be as confident, even looking at a video that you would assume is a legitimate video and hasn't been doctored. So there's tactics and techniques like that. There's a lot of micro-targeting that goes on. Obviously, social media is a fantastic platform for micro-targeting where you can reach very specific demographics of people, and you can target them with very few false positives. Everyone that you're targeting on the platform is who you're trying to reach. And I think, we haven't specifically seen this, but you think about the amount of people that vote on things like local propositions on the ballot. You can imagine that if there were specific micro-targeting around specific ballot initiatives where the voter turnout in certain, smaller towns or cities is only a couple thousand people, being able to sway perception or opinion on some of those smaller issues could have a real material impact. And I think we talk a lot as a nation about sort of tampering with actual voting systems, and we talk about some of the dangers and risks inherent in e-voting and e-voting systems, and rightfully so. But I think this is actually disinformation, and these influence operations are actually much more insidious and a much larger problem than voting machine tampering. If you think about tampering with voting machines, you have to do it on a pretty large scale generally to impact the outcome of an election. But with disinformation and these influence operations, you can achieve your outcome in a very insidious sort of way.
So we all have the crazy uncle who sends the email that has 1,000 people forwarded on it and CC'd on it. And that's pretty easy to identify as something that's probably not real, right? But when you're on Facebook, when you're on Google, how can you be a critical thinker and find out that this is maybe something that might not be truthful?
Sure. So it is interesting because it's interesting. We've actually seen some instances where foreign nation disinformation campaigns actually cross or intersect with local domestic groups that sort of have the same policy agenda. So, for instance, gun rights is an issue that is extremely polarizing, and that's where you'll see a lot of people online that will be using specific media to try and push the agenda one way or another, and we'll actually see an intersection with foreign influence operations that basically piggyback on or amplify that same message because it happens to suit their purpose at the time. So you actually get some level of amplification sometimes just between foreign influence operations and domestic groups, right, that just happen to sort of be on the same trajectory at that period of time.
So we're going to take a quick break, and then when we get back, we'll go into some more ways that you can protect yourself and be a critical thinker. My guest today is Levi Gundert, Vice President of Intelligence and Risk at Recorded Future. I'm your moderator, Scott Maucione, on the discussion Protecting Data in a Connected World, sponsored by Recorded Future on Federal News Radio, part of the Federal News Network.